Welcome to Real Talk Horror, the podcast where we dive into the spookiest, most thrilling corners of cinema, unpacking the chills, thrills, and everything in between. I'm your host, Josh Bell, and I'm thrilled to be kicking off an ambitious new series spotlighting one of the most iconic names in horror, the legendary John Carpenter. Let's be honest, when it comes to horror directors, Carpenter is in a league of his own. He's the mastermind behind some of the most unforgettable scares ever to grace the big screen. But his work isn't just about horror, it's about tension, atmosphere, and crafting worlds that leave a lasting impression. Over the next 18 episodes, we'll take a journey through Carpenter's groundbreaking career, exploring the themes, techniques, and cultural impact of his films. Here's how we're breaking it down. The series will be divided into 6 phases, each highlighting a unique aspect of Carpenter's filmography. Phase 1 starts strong. We're going to dive into the heavy hitters right away. Halloween, Dark Star, and The Thing. These films represent Carpenter's ability to create iconic, genre-defining work that cemented his status as a legend. Phase 2, we're going to expand the conversation. In this phase, we'll tackle Escape from New York, Christine, and The Fog, examining how Carpenter built upon his early success and expanded his narrative range. And then Phase 3, where we highlight the underrated. It's time to shine a light on the gems that don't always get the love they deserve. They Live, Prince of Darkness, and Starman. Phase 4, we're going to dive into the cult and controversial. From the fantastical Big Trouble in Little China to the mind-bending In the Mouth of Madness and the eerie Village of the Damned, this phase is all about Carpenter's boldest and often most debated projects. Phase 5, we're going to tackle some of the polarizing works. We'll take a closer look at the films Assault on Precinct 13, Escape from L.A., and Memoirs of an Invisible Man, exploring why these films divided fans and critics alike. Phase 6, where we conclude with the most contentious. Finally, we'll wrap things up with Vampires, Ghosts of Mars, and The Ward, discussing Carpenter's later career and how his legacy has evolved over time. Now, where better to begin this epic retrospective than with the film that launched Carpenter into the mainstream? That's right, today we're kicking things off with Halloween. Released in 1978, Halloween isn't just a movie, it's a phenomenon. It introduced us to The Shape, Michael Myers, the silent, masked figure who has haunted audiences' nightmares for nearly 50 years. This isn't just another slasher film. Halloween is the slasher film. This is the one that set the blueprint for an entire subgenre and defined a generation of horror fans. So what makes Halloween so special? Why do we still talk about it 50 years later? And how did this film put Carpenter on the map as a horror legend? To set the stage, we have to rewind a little bit. Carpenter had already impressed his critics with Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976, a gritty thriller that showed off his knack for tension and atmosphere. But Halloween, this was an entirely new ballgame. With a shoestring budget, an unforgettable score, and a visionary approach, Carpenter proved you don't need flashy effects or excessive gore to terrify your audience. You just needed a story that would linger with them long after they've left the theater. And here's the fun part. Halloween is just the beginning. So grab your popcorn, maybe a flashlight, and let's head to Haddonfield to explore the magic and the menace of Halloween. Ready? Let's dive in. Let's start with the story of Halloween, because even if you've seen it 100 times, the suspense never gets old. The film begins on a chilling Halloween night in 1963. A seemingly ordinary 6-year-old boy, Michael Myers, commits an act of unspeakable violence. He murders his teenage sister in cold blood. Fast forward 15 years and Michael escapes from a mental institution, making a beeline back to his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois. His mission? A new reign of terror that centers on a group of unsuspecting babysitters, including Laurie Strode. Laurie, played by Jamie Lee Curtis in her cinematic debut, and let me tell you, she owns the role. Laurie isn't your typical horror heroine. She's resourceful, relatable, and most importantly, real. As Michael begins his relentless stalking, Laurie's quiet strength shines through, embodying Carpenter's signature take on survival under pressure. Meanwhile, we meet Dr. Loomis, played with unmatched gravitas by Donald Pleasance. Loomis isn't your average movie psychiatrist. He's not just concerned about Michael's escape. He's terrified. He knows the evil he's up against. Pure, motiveless evil that can't be reasoned with, stopped, or even understood. His desperate pursuit of Michael serves as the audience's warning. This isn't just a man. This is something far more sinister. And then there's Mike Myers, the shape himself. He doesn't need dialogue or backstory. His blank, expressionless mask says everything. He's not just a killer, he's an unstoppable force, a faceless representation of fear itself, the boogeyman. Carpenter's choice to make him silent and emotionless makes him all the more terrifying. He's everywhere and nowhere, lurking just beyond the edge of the frame, watching, waiting. What makes Halloween resonate so deeply are the themes Carpenter weaves throughout the film. The vulnerability of suburban life, the idea that the safe streets of your neighborhood can harbor unimaginable horrors hits home for many viewers. The concept of evil without motive, a force that simply exists to destroy, adds a layer of dread that will stick with you. Carpenter also brilliantly taps into the universal fear of being isolated, even in a seemingly bustling world. Laurie's struggle isn't just physical, it's emotional. She's alone, responsible for protecting not just herself, but the children she's babysitting, all while facing this unstoppable force. This force on isolation and survival is a hallmark of Carpenter's storytelling, and it's never been more effective than right here. And we can't talk about Halloween without emphasizing the strength of its characters. Laurie Strode became the archetype for the final girl trope, but she's so much more than that. Her intelligence, determination, and vulnerability make her a heroine we root for every step of the way. Dr. Loomis, with his grim warnings and unshakable conviction, brings intensity and urgency to the story. And Michael Myers, well, he's the stuff of nightmares, an enigma wrapped in a jumpsuit and mask, leaving us with more questions than answers. This trio, Laurie, Loomis, Michael, forms the backbone of the film, and their interplay creates a tension that Carpenter expertly stretches to its breaking point. It's horror at its most primal and most pure. Let's talk about some of the magic behind the scenes of Halloween. Because if there's one thing John Carpenter knows how to do, it's create a masterpiece on a dime. This film was made on an almost laughable budget of just $325,000. To put that in perspective, most blockbuster films today spend more on catering. But what Carpenter and his team pulled off with this modest sum is nothing short of legendary. especially when you consider Halloween went on to rake in around $70 million worldwide. Talk about a killer return on investment. Carpenter wore multiple hats for this project, and honestly, I'm in awe of his multitasking genius. Not only did he direct the film, but he also co-wrote the screenplay, composed that iconic heart-pounding score. Can you imagine Halloween without its eerie piano theme? It's as much part of the character in the film as Michael Myers himself. Carpenter didn't do it all alone. Enter Deborah Hill, the film's producer and co-writer. Hill brought a fresh perspective to the teenage characters, giving them an authenticity that's often missing in horror. Those casual conversations about boys and babysitting, that was Hill's influence. And it's a big reason why Laurie Strode and her friends feel real. And then there's the casting. Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't a household name when she signed on for Halloween. In fact, this is her debut. But Carpenter saw something in her. Maybe it was the fact that she's the daughter of Janet Leigh, the scream queen from Psycho. Curtis brought vulnerability, strength, and relatability to Laurie, turning her into one of horror's most iconic heroines. On the flip side, Carpenter brought in seasoned actor Donald Pleasance to play Dr. Loomis. Pleasance was a huge get for this production, adding a level of gravitas and credibility that elevated the entire film. His portrayal of the obsessed, doom-saying psychiatrist is unforgettable, and it's hard to imagine anyone else in this role. Filming itself was an adventure. While the film is set in the crisp, leaf-strewn streets of Haddonfield, Illinois, it was actually shot in sunny Pasadena, California. The crew had to get creative to sell the illusion of a Midwestern autumn. They hand-painted leaves, scattered them around the set, and then, get this, picked them up after every shot to reuse them. Talk about stretching a dollar. And then there's the technical innovation. Carpenter's use of the Panaglide camera, a cheaper alternative to the Steadicam at the time, was groundbreaking. Those long, continuous POV shots that put us directly in Michael Myers' shoes, they're iconic now, but at the time they were revolutionary. Carpenter used this technique to build suspense and immerse us in the killer's perspective and make us complicit in his stalking. Lighting was another unsung hero of Halloween. With a tight budget, the team relied on minimal lighting to create the film's oppressive atmosphere. Shadows became just as menacing as Michael himself, and Carpenter played with our imagination, letting what we couldn't see terrify us even more than what we could. What's most impressive about all of this is how Carpenter turned limitations into strengths. Instead of flashy effects or expensive sets, he leaned into simplicity, letting tension and atmosphere take center stage. The result is a film that's as timeless as it is terrifying, proving that you don't need a massive budget to make something unforgettable. So the next time you watch Halloween, take a moment to appreciate the sheer ingenuity that went into its creation. Every fake leaf, every haunting note of the score, and every carefully framed shot was crafted by a team that knew how to turn constraints into creativity. Now, what makes Halloween such a quintessential John Carpenter film? Carpenter has a signature style that's unmistakable, and it's on full display here. One of his greatest strengths, creating suspense through simplicity. While some horror directors throw everything and the kitchen sink at you, gore, jump scares, loud noises, Carpenter takes a more restrained, almost surgical approach to scaring you. Take the opening sequence, for example. The long, unbroken POV shot of 6-year-old Michael Myers committing his first murder is a masterclass in tension. Carpenter doesn't rely on flashy editing or gratuitous violence. Instead, he uses the slow, deliberate pace of the camera to put you inside the killer's head. It's unsettling in a way that lingers after the scene ends. You're still thinking about it later in the movie. And then there's the music. Oh man, the music. Carpenter's score here is legendary. The haunting 5/4 time signature piano theme. You hear it and your heart rate instantly spikes. It's so simple, just a few repetitive notes, but it's effective in a way that's primal. Fun fact, Carpenter composed the entire score in just 3 days. Let that sink in. 3 days. Sometimes the simplest ideas are the most brilliant, and this is a perfect example. The score doesn't just complement the film, it is the film in so many ways. Visually, Carpenter's work in Halloween is a lesson in doing more with less. His use of tight framing is genius. Think about those shots where Michael Myers is just barely visible in the background, shrouded in shadow or framed by a doorway. Carpenter doesn't shove the horror in your face. Instead, he lets it creep around the edges, making you strain your eyes to catch every detail. That deliberate ambiguity forces your imagination to fill in the blanks, which, let's be real, is often scarier than anything on screen. Carpenter's pacing is another hallmark of his style. He's a fan of the slow burn, and Halloween is no exception. The movie takes its time, building tension scene by scene. You feel the unease growing, like a pressure cooker about to explode, and when the scares come, they hit with the force of a sledgehammer. It's not just about what happens, it's how and when it happens. Carpenter is a master of timing, knowing exactly when to strike for maximum impact. And let's talk about Michael Myers himself. The blank, expressionless mask. Pure genius. It's not just a mask, it's a void. There's no emotion, no humanity, just a blank slate onto which we project our own fears. Carpenter understood that we don't know about a monster is more terrifying than what we do know. Michael doesn't have a complicated backstory or a clear motive. He's just evil, and that simplicity makes him chillingly universal. On a narrative level, Carpenter flips some genre conventions on their heads. Laurie Strode isn't just a helpless victim waiting to be rescued. She's resourceful, determined, and proactive in her own survival. When push comes to shove, she pushes back, using whatever's at her disposal. In a genre that often reduces women to screaming victims, Laurie stands out as a trailblazer, a final girl who takes charge of her own fate. Carpenter also has a knack for capturing the quiet horror of suburban life. Haddonfield is supposed to be the perfect, idyllic small town, but Carpenter peels back the facade to show us the vulnerability lurking beneath. He taps into a universal fear, the idea that no place, no matter how safe it seems, is truly secure. Michael Myers could be lurking anywhere, behind a hedge, in the shadows of your living room, and that's what makes the film so unsettling. In Halloween, every element, visuals, sound, pacing, narrative, it's all working together to create this seamless, immersive experience. It's Carpenter's vision at its purest, a testament to his belief that less is more. By stripping away the excess, he created a film that's timeless, terrifying, and uniquely his own. When we talk about the impact of Halloween, it's not just about how much money it made or how many screams it generated. It's how it fundamentally changed and reshaped the horror genre. This wasn't just another scary movie. Halloween was the blueprint for the modern slasher film. Without it, you don't get Friday the 13th. You don't get A Nightmare on Elm Street. And you definitely don't get the sprawling maze of horror franchises we know today. One of its most lasting contributions is, of course, the character of Michael Myers. He's not just a killer, he's the killer. The prototype for the masked, unstoppable villain. But here's the thing, Michael Myers isn't dripping in backstory or motivation. He is just pure, unrelenting evil. Carpenter famously described him as the Shape, which perfectly captures the essence of his character. He's more than a person, he's a presence, a force of nature. And let's talk about the mask, one of the most famous props in cinematic history. It's wild to think that it started out as a repurposed Captain Kirk William Shatner mask from Star Trek, painted white and with widened eye holes. It's so simple, yet it's become an enduring symbol of fear. Why? Because it's blank, expressionless, and totally devoid of humanity. That facelessness makes it universal. It's what we project onto it that terrifies us. But Michael Myers isn't the only reason Halloween endures. The film's success also cemented John Carpenter as a visionary director. Imagine being a young filmmaker working on a tiny budget today, that $325,000, and creating a masterpiece that grosses over $70 million worldwide. That's the kind of rags to riches story that filmmakers dream about. And Carpenter didn't just succeed commercially. He left an artistic legacy that continues to inspire. You can see Halloween's fingerprints all over modern horror. Directors like Jordan Peele and Ari Aster owe a lot to Carpenter's emphasis on atmosphere and tension. Peele's Get Out and Aster's Hereditary both take their time building dread, letting the unease simmer before delivering their knockout punches. That's classic Carpenter, prioritizing mood over cheap thrills. Beyond individual directors, the film's DNA is woven into the fabric of the genre itself. The final girl trope, Laurie Strode is the gold standard. The unstoppable killer who just keeps coming, Michael set the bar. And let's not forget the structure, a slow burn setup that builds to a relentless, heart-pounding climax. But it's not just filmmakers who have kept Halloween alive in our cultural consciousness. It's the fans. The film has a cult following that's only grown over the decades. Think about it. Every October, you see Michael Myers masks on store shelves, hear Carpenter's eerie piano theme playing in haunted houses, and watch countless rewatches of Halloween marathons. It's a staple of the season, a tradition as much as carving pumpkins or trick-or-treating. And then there's the broader cultural influence. Halloween is more than a movie, it's a phenomenon. Michael Myers is instantly recognizable to people who've never even seen the film. The mask, the music, the mere idea of the unstoppable killer, it's all part of the collective cultural psyche. Halloween didn't just scare audiences. It changed the way we tell scary stories. It proved that horror could be artful, minimalist, and deeply unsettling without losing its entertainment value. It's not just a film, it's a legacy, one that will continue to cast its long, dark shadow over the horror genre for decades from now. When Halloween first hit theaters in 1978, critics weren't exactly tripping over themselves to praise it. Sure, some recognize its craftsmanship. Roger Ebert famously gave it a glowing review, calling it an absolutely merciless thriller. But many dismissed it as just another low-budget horror flick. It was the audiences, not the critics, who saw the genius first. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. This wasn't just a scary movie. It was the scary movie, and people couldn't stop talking about it. Over time, the critical perception of Halloween shifted dramatically. It went from being seen as a decent indie shocker to being hailed as one of the greatest horror films of all time. What changed? Well, for one, the film's influence became undeniable. As the slasher genre exploded in the 80s with countless imitators borrowing Carpenter's techniques, it became clear just how revolutionary Halloween had been. But the re-evaluation isn't just about its technical brilliance or its impact on the genre. It's about its enduring themes, the vulnerability of suburban life, the terror of the unknown, and the lurking danger just beyond the picket fence. These ideas resonate just as strongly today as they did in the 70s. Think about it. In an era where we're constantly reminded that danger can strike anywhere, Halloween feels eerily prescient. Michael Myers, the shape, embodies the fear of the unseen and the unexplained. Why does he kill? We don't know. And that's what makes him so terrifying. He's not driven by revenge, trauma, or some convoluted backstory. He just is. The primal fear of the random, the unstoppable, it's timeless. And let's not overlook how modern audiences have embraced Halloween. Every October, it's a go-to rewatch for horror fans. Streaming platforms highlight it in their spooky season lineups. Filmmakers reference it, homage it, and yes, reboot it. Looking at you, David Gordon Green. It's a film that continues to evolve with the times while remaining true to its roots. What's perhaps most fascinating is how Halloween speaks to new generations of viewers. For audiences in 1978, it was groundbreaking. For audiences today, it's a masterclass in how to scare without relying on CGI, jump scares, or excessive gore. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, a creepy mask, a haunting score, and a shadow lurking just out of view, are the most effective. While critics might have been slow to warm up to Halloween, time has proven them wrong. This isn't just a great horror film. It's a milestone that has more than earned its place in the pantheon of all-time greats. Not horror films, all-time great films. It's a reminder that horror, at its best, doesn't just make you scream. It stays with you, lurking in the back of your mind long after the lights have been turned back on. One of the most iconic and unsettling scenes in Halloween is Michael Myers silently stalking Laurie Strode across the street. This scene is a masterclass in building tension, largely due to its restrained use of cinematic elements. Let's break it down. The camera work in this moment is intentionally voyeuristic, placing the audience in Michael's perspective at times and forcing us to adopt the role of the stalker. John Carpenter uses long takes and deliberate framing to make us feel trapped in the moment. The way the camera lingers on Michael, standing motionless in the shadows or stepping deliberately into view, creates a sense of inevitability. We're not just watching Laurie, we're watching her being watched. The pacing is another crucial component. Carpenter stretches the moment out, allowing every small movement, every hesitant glance Laurie casts to build on the dread. Unlike modern horror, which often rushes to the scare, this scene breathes. It gives the tension time to grow, making every second feel excruciatingly long. And then there's the sound, or rather, in this instance, the lack of it. The absence of music or dialogue creates a vacuum where our anxiety fills the space. When Carpenter's score does come in, it's perfectly timed. The minimalist piano theme heightens the dread without overwhelming the scene. Silence and sound are used sparingly, but to maximum effect. What really sets Halloween apart in Carpenter's filmography is its simplicity. The terror doesn't come from gore, elaborate effects, or jump scares. Instead, it's rooted in an atmosphere and anticipation. Carpenter trusts us as the audience to fill in the gaps with our imagination. And for me, that is scarier than just about anything explicitly shown. The scene encapsulates the primal fear that Halloween taps into. The fear of being watched, pursued, vulnerable in what should be a safe and familiar place. By focusing on these universal fears and executing them with precision, Carpenter created a moment and a film that will continue to resonate. It's a reminder again that less is more. When you strip horror down to its essentials, as Carpenter does here, you get something timeless and unforgettable. Halloween is quite simply a masterclass in horror filmmaking. It's not just a movie, it's an experience, a haunting journey into fear that will stay with you. Its brilliance lies in simplicity, the minimal dialogue, the tight pacing, and Carpenter's now iconic score. Every element works together seamlessly to create an atmosphere of dread that's impossible to shake. For me, this is a 10 out of 10, no question. It's a film that has stood the test of time and continues to be a touchstone for the genre. Whether you're a die-hard horror fan or someone just trying it out for the first time, Halloween is a must-watch. It's more than just a slasher. It's a testament to how much you can achieve with a sharp vision, a skilled cast, and a lot of creativity, even on a shoestring budget. And while Halloween is widely recognized as a classic now, it's worth remembering that this was just the beginning for John Carpenter. The man's creativity didn't stop here. So for our next episode, we're traveling back to where it all began. Carpenter's debut feature, Dark Star. It's a far cry from Halloween's suburban terror, but it's a fascinating glimpse into the filmmaker Carpenter would become. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. That wraps up today's episode of Real Talk Horror. Thank you so much for joining me as we kick off this deep dive into the works of John Carpenter. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Halloween, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It really helps other listeners discover the show and grow our little horror-loving community. And don't forget, follow me on Instagram and Threads. We're at Real Talk. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Halloween or any of Carpenter's other films, so feel free to reach out. Until the next time, keep the lights on, stay safe, and keep the popcorn close, because you never know what might just be lurking in the shadows.